I had been planning the trip to Daytona for months. I wasn't even a huge racing fan, but every year I heard how crazy the big race week got, how people from all over the country packed into every corner of the city, camping wherever they could. I figured it would be something new, something I could talk about later. I took my camper, an older model I'd picked up a couple years earlier, and loaded it up with enough supplies to last me a week or more. My Pomeranian buddy came along too. He was small, barely 7 pounds, but he acted like he was twice that size, always strutting around like he owned whatever ground he walked on. I arrived a few days before the race, finding a spot in a large, mostly flat field that had been opened up for campers. It wasn't really an organized campground. It was more like a makeshift trailer park, a wide-open area surrounded by trees and empty land. There were only a few floodlights here and there, mostly clustered closer to the entrance and where the main access road curved through. My spot was further back. I liked it that way. Quieter, less people bumping into you, fewer drunks hollering at 3 in the morning. The first few days were fine. Hot during the day, cool at night, a little humid. Buddy spent most of his time sitting in the open doorway of the camper, barking at people riding past on four-wheelers or golf carts. I'd set up a few folding chairs outside and kept a small fire pit handy, though I didn't use it much. Most nights I was tired and just wanted to sit, maybe drink a beer, and listen to the muffled noise drifting from the busy parts of the park. One night, probably the 3rd or 4th night, I decided Buddy needed a walk. I didn't really want to, since it was already past midnight and the air felt heavy, almost sticky. But he kept pacing back and forth at the door, whining and scratching the frame. I figured better to let him out now than have him wake me up at 3 in the morning. I didn't bother grabbing a flashlight. There was just enough light from the distant lamps and the faint orange glow of the city beyond the trees that I could see the road if I looked hard enough. I slid my boots on, clipped the leash to Buddy's harness, and stepped down into the cool dirt. The place felt different at night. It was quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like everything had wound down too much, like the night had settled heavy over the field and was pressing everything into silence. I could hear some music way off in the distance, someone yelling now and then, but nearby it was just the soft scuff of my boots and Buddy's little nails tapping against the hard ground. We walked slow, Buddy stopping to sniff at patches of grass or empty beer cans half buried in the dirt. The road wasn't much more than a wide dirt path, packed down from trucks and campers rolling over it for days. The farther we got from my camper, the less light there was. The floodlights didn't reach out this far. They left wide, empty gaps of darkness between them, big spaces where the world just faded into black shapes and quiet. I wasn't nervous exactly, but I was alert. I kept my eyes moving, scanning the darkness, checking over my shoulder now and then. I had that feeling you get sometimes when you're outside alone at night, like you're not really supposed to be there, like everything is watching you, even though you can't see anything. Buddy didn't seem to notice. He tugged the leash this way and that, interested in everything but the creeping feeling that was starting to crawl under my skin. After maybe 10 minutes of walking, we stopped. I don't know why. I think I was just tired of moving, or maybe I heard something, a noise too soft to recognize but loud enough to make me pause. Buddy stood still too, his body tense like he was waiting for me to tell him what to do next. That's when I saw it. Off to the side of the road, maybe 30 feet away, there was something. It was low to the ground, pale in color, just barely visible against the dark earth. At first I thought it might be a bag of trash or a piece of tarp someone had dumped, but it wasn't shaped right. It didn't have any corners or folds. It looked almost like a body lying flat, but not quite. It was too smooth, too still. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My heart started to thud in my chest, slow and heavy. I squinted into the darkness, willing my eyes to find some familiar shape. A part of me expected it to move, to sit up, to crawl, to come rushing toward me. But it just stayed there, quiet and motionless. Buddy didn't react at all. He didn't bark or growl. He didn't even seem to see it. He just stood there, panting lightly, looking off down the road like nothing was wrong. I didn't move right away. I stood frozen, one hand wrapped tight around Buddy's leash, the other hanging limp at my side. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was just a discarded piece of equipment or a chunk of old canvas someone had lost. Maybe it was a drunk passed out after wandering too far from their own campsite. But something about the way it just sat there, completely silent, made my stomach twist. After what felt like forever, I slowly started walking again, gently tugging Buddy along with me. I didn't turn my back to it. I kept it in the corner of my eye as I moved sideways, putting more distance between us, sliding away like I was afraid to wake it up. We moved to a different part of the field, closer to a small cluster of other campers where a few fires still burned low in their pits. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the pale shape following us, dragging itself across the dirt. But there was nothing, just empty road and shadows. I didn't walk Buddy much longer. I kept the leash tight in my hand, steering him in tight circles near the light and the noise. I didn't want to go too far from the safety of the other people. When I finally made it back to my camper, I locked the door tight behind me, drew the thin curtains over the windows, and sat there in the silence, listening. The night passed slowly. Every creak of the camper frame made me jump. Every gust of wind against the thin metal walls felt like a hand brushing past. Buddy curled up in my lap and slept without a care in the world, but I barely closed my eyes. I kept seeing that pale shape in my mind, replaying the moment over and over again, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The next morning I went back out there, walking the same path we'd taken, this time with full daylight and a hot cup of coffee in my hand. I wanted to see what it had been. I wanted to put it to rest in my mind, to prove to myself that it had been something simple and harmless. But when I got to the spot where I had seen it, there was nothing there. No trash, no canvas, no passed out drunk, just empty dirt and scattered bits of grass. I walked a wide circle around the area, checking the nearby brush and ditches. Nothing. It was like whatever I'd seen had just vanished. I told myself that maybe someone had picked it up in the early morning hours, or maybe I had seen a trick of the light, a patch of pale sand catching the glow from a distant lamp. I made myself believe it because the alternative, that there had been something real and strange out there with me and Buddy, was too much to sit with. The rest of the week passed without anything else happening. I went to the race, watched the cars roar past in a blur of sound and color, drank beer with strangers, and tried to enjoy myself. But every night when I took Buddy out for a walk, I stayed close to the camper, close to the lights. I never wandered too far again. When the week was over and I packed up to leave, I felt a weird sense of relief, like I was getting away from something, even though I never really saw anything after that night. The drive home was long and uneventful, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the low whine of Buddy snoring in the passenger seat. Even now, thinking back, I still don't know what it was I saw. Maybe it really was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was something simple and harmless. But sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet and the world outside my window turns black and deep, I remember the way that shape sat so still, so silent, in the dirt. And I remember the cold knot of fear that had settled in my chest. I don't camp much anymore, and when I do, I make sure I've got a good flashlight and I stay close to the other campers. I guess once you see something like that, even if it doesn't do anything, even if it never moves, it sticks with you. It reminds you that sometimes the dark holds things you'll never be able to explain, no matter how hard you try. And sometimes the smart thing isn't to walk toward it and figure it out. Sometimes the smart thing is exactly what I did that night, just quietly move away and don't look back. I have always been someone who trusted my gut. I don't mean that in some vague, inspirational way. I mean it in the way that when my instincts whisper that something is wrong, I don't argue with them. I listen. This saved me more than once in my work, dealing with violent people, situations that could go south in a blink. I know what it feels like when that primal part of me lights up. It's not nervousness. It's not anxiety. It's a signal, clean and sharp, that something around me is not right. That's why I remember so clearly that camping trip, the way the hair stood on the back of my neck, the way my heart sped up even before I understood why. It's also why I'm here writing this, because I trusted that instinct. It was early fall when I decided to head out. I needed a break. Work had been rough, a few tough calls, a few near misses. I needed to clear my head, and getting off the grid always helped. I chose a spot deep in the national forest, a place far enough from the regular campsites that I knew I wouldn't run into anybody unless I wanted to. I packed light but smart: tent, sleeping bag, water, food, my knife, and my sidearm. I wasn't reckless. Nature doesn't care how tough you think you are. The hike in took most of the day. The trees were thick, the trails were rough, and the place was alive with the smells and sounds of the season. The earthy smell of leaves starting to rot, the dampness of the ground, the sound of wind high above me where the branches thinned out. I found a flat spot near a shallow stream, set back enough that I could hear the water but not be right on top of it. Perfect, quiet, nobody for miles. Just me, the woods, and the steady rhythm of breathing in and out. Setting up camp was routine. Tent pitched, fire pit cleared, a pile of dry wood stacked nearby. I kept everything neat. Years of habit. If you get sloppy, you suffer later. By the time the sun started to fall behind the hills, I was sitting by the fire, a can of soup warming up, feeling like I'd finally found some peace. The first night passed without anything strange. I slept hard, wrapped up in my bag. The fire burned down to coals. The noises of the forest lulled me. Crickets, owls, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Normal sounds. Sounds that told you the forest was alive, but not in any threatening way. The second day, I roamed a bit. I didn't have a real destination, just wandering with my pack, taking in the colors of the leaves, the chill that stayed in the shadows even when the sun was warm. I circled back in the late afternoon, collected more firewood, and sat by the stream for a while, watching the water slide over rocks and fallen branches. It wasn't until I headed back toward my camp that I noticed the first thing that felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The forest looked the same, smelled the same, but something was off. The stillness had changed. It wasn't just quieter, it was a kind of pressure, like something holding its breath, just out of sight. My skin prickled. I slowed down, listening hard, scanning the trees. Nothing obvious. No crack of a branch, no flash of movement. Just that feeling growing heavier with every step. Back at camp, everything looked untouched. My tent was still zipped, my gear undisturbed. I circled it twice, looking for footprints or signs of anything out of place. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I built the fire up bigger than usual that night. I kept my knife close at hand. The woods stayed quiet. Too quiet. Normally you'd hear the nighttime creatures, raccoons, foxes, maybe a coyote way off. But not that night. It was like the entire forest had gone still. I sat with my back against a tree, not the tent. A tent's nothing but fabric between you and whatever's out there. At least with a tree, you had something solid at your back. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the fire burned down again. Long enough that my legs got stiff. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something. A soft crunch of leaves, a shift of weight. But when I turned my head, there was nothing. No shape in the firelight. No eyes reflecting back at me. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew the fire was cold, and the first thin light of morning was creeping into the sky. I stretched, my joints popping, and forced myself to shake it off. Probably just jumpy, I told myself. Probably just too much time alone making me hear things that weren't there. But as I moved around camp that morning, making coffee and kicking the fire back to life, I found something that made my stomach drop. About 10 feet from where I'd been sitting, there was a single footprint. Not an animal track, a boot print. The tread was clear in the soft earth. Someone had been standing there, watching. It hadn't rained, and the ground wasn't muddy, so the print couldn't have been that old. I circled the camp again, heart hammering, but didn't find any others. Just that one. Like whoever it was had been careful. I should have packed up right then. Every part of me was screaming to get out, but a part of me, the stubborn part, didn't want to be chased off by some creep. I convinced myself that maybe it was just an old print. Maybe a hunter had passed through days ago. I stayed. I told myself I'd be alert, that I'd sleep with one eye open. That day, I barely left camp. I stayed close, listening, watching. I made a show of moving around normally, but inside I was wired tight. Every time the wind moved the branches, every time a squirrel darted across the ground, I jumped. I kept my sidearm holstered at my side, checked it more than once to make sure it was loaded and ready. The feeling of being watched never went away. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep in the tent. I sat against the same tree, fire roaring high. I made sure the flames threw light into the trees as far as they could reach, but the woods beyond stayed black. I kept my back to the tree, my knife and gun laid across my lap, and I waited. Around midnight, I heard it. A branch breaking, not a snap from the wind. A sharp, sudden crack like weight had broken it. I stiffened, holding my breath. The firelight didn't reach that far. I squinted, trying to see into the blackness. Another step, another crunch. Whatever it was moving slow, deliberate. I raised the gun, aimed into the dark, and waited. I wasn't about to fire blindly, but I was ready. The sound stopped for a long time. Long enough that I thought maybe I imagined it. Long enough that doubt crept in. Maybe it had been a deer. Maybe a figure stepped just barely into the edge of the firelight. Not an animal, not some shapeless shadow. Person, standing there, half hidden by the trees, just watching me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. They didn't either. We just stared at each other, the fire crackling between us. I couldn't see details, no face, no expression. Just a tall shape, still as stone. My gut told me one thing loud and clear. If I looked away, if I let my guard down even for a second, it would move. So I didn't. I stayed locked on it, muscles screaming from the tension, heart hammering so loud I could barely hear the fire. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably minutes, the figure stepped backward, melting into the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't put the gun down. I kept the fire high until the sky started to lighten with dawn. When I could see the woods clearly again, I packed up fast. Tent, gear, everything stuffed haphazardly into my pack. I kept my gun in my hand the whole time. The hike out was the longest of my life. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, expecting a hand to grab me from the trees. I moved quick but careful, listening for footsteps behind me. I didn't hear any, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Only when I was back at my truck, locked inside with the engine running, did I let myself breathe. I drove straight home, not stopping, not looking back. Even now, months later, I think about it. I think about how close I came to something worse, because I know deep down that whoever that was, they weren't just wandering through. They were hunting, watching, waiting for a mistake. I trusted my instincts that night. They kept me alive. If you ever find yourself out there, deep in the woods, and you feel that prickling on the back of your neck, that tightening in your chest, listen to it. It's not fear. It's the part of you that still remembers what it means to be prey. And sometimes, that's the only thing standing between you and whatever's waiting in the dark. I've always loved getting out into the woods. Camping was my way of shutting off from the noise of the world. No phone, no emails, no endless headlines. Just me, my tent, some basic gear, and the long quiet of nature. I wasn't new to it. I'd done trips all across the state and even out of state sometimes when I had the time off. It became kind of a personal tradition every summer to pick a spot, drive out, hike in a few miles, set up camp, and stay a couple nights. This time, I picked a national forest about 3 hours from home. I won't name it because honestly, after this trip, I don't like talking about it much. It was a Thursday when I packed up and left. I figured if I went out during the week, there'd be fewer people around. That's usually what I wanted: privacy, peace. But looking back, I realized maybe being alone wasn't the smartest thing. The drive was uneventful. Long stretches of highway, then smaller roads winding through towns that looked half abandoned. Then the forest roads, those narrow, cracked strips of asphalt that lead you deep into the woods. I had printed a map just in case my phone lost signal, which it did about 30 minutes before I even got to the trailhead. When I pulled into the dirt lot by the start of the trail, there were only 2 other cars. That was perfect to me. It meant I probably wouldn't run into many people out there. I shouldered my pack, checked my gear one more time. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, knife, flashlight, lighter, first aid kit, all there and locked up my car. The air smelled like pine and dirt and something faintly sweet, like wildflowers blooming somewhere unseen. It was warm, probably in the low 80s, but not unbearable. The trail wasn't hard, mostly flat with a few hills. After about 3 miles, I veered off onto a narrower, less traveled path that led down toward a creek I had marked on my map. It was shaded there, the trees thicker, the ground softer with fallen needles. I found a flat spot not far from the water and set up my tent. It was a small, one-person job, bright green. I laid out my gear, hung my food in a bag from a tree to keep animals away, and collected some wood for a fire. As the sun dropped, the woods cooled fast. Shadows grew long between the trees. I got a small fire going and heated a can of soup. It was simple but good. When it got fully dark, I sat by the fire and just listened to the sounds of the forest. The creek trickling nearby, insects buzzing, the occasional snap of a branch from some animal moving through the underbrush. Normal sounds, comforting even. At some point, I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. I lay there for a while, staring up at the fabric, watching shadows sway when the wind moved the branches outside. It was a quiet night. No clouds, no rain, just stillness. Sometime deep into the night, I woke up. No idea what time it was. I didn't have a watch and my phone was off to save battery. It was dark, really dark. I lay there a second, trying to figure out why I was awake. Then I realized it was too quiet. The normal background noise, the insects, the frogs by the creek, all of it was gone. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I stayed perfectly still. That old primal feeling washed over me, a tightness in my chest. Something wasn't right. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard it, a soft crunch outside, like a footstep on dry leaves. At first, I told myself it was just a deer, maybe even a raccoon sniffing around for scraps. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded heavier, slower, more deliberate. Another step, closer this time. I slid my hand slowly toward my knife, which I had placed next to me before sleeping, just in case. My fingers closed around the handle. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the sound. It seemed to be circling my tent, moving so slowly I could barely tell it was moving at all. I held my breath. For a long time, there was nothing, just that awful silence and the tension in my muscles. Then a faint sound, a sort of low, almost inaudible sniffing, like whatever was out there was trying to smell me. My skin crawled. I stayed like that, frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. They were so slow, so careful. After a while, the night sounds started to come back, little by little. A frog croaked down by the creek. Cricket chirped. I didn't sleep again that night. I just lay there, clutching the knife, staring at the ceiling of my tent until the sky outside started to lighten. When the sun came up, everything looked normal, peaceful even. I stepped outside, my body stiff from lying tense all night. I checked around the camp. There were a few disturbed patches of dirt and leaves, but nothing clear enough to make out tracks. I told myself it had to have been a curious animal. A bear maybe, although it hadn't made nearly enough noise for that. Bears crash through the brush like bulldozers. Whatever this was, it had been quiet. Too quiet. Still, I wasn't ready to leave. I had another night planned, and I didn't want to punk out just because I got spooked. I went about my day, hiked a bit farther down the creek, fished for a while without much luck, gathered more wood for the fire. I tried to enjoy it, but there was an edge to everything now. Every snap of a branch, every gust of wind made me turn my head. That second night, I built a bigger fire. I kept it going longer too. Something about the light and heat made me feel safer. I ate, sat by the flames until they burned low, then reluctantly crawled into the tent again. It didn't take long for sleep to come. I was exhausted. This time, I woke up to a different sound, a metallic clink. It was faint, but in the utter stillness of the woods, it might as well have been a gunshot. I bolted upright, heart hammering. Another clink. I recognized it then, the the sound of my bear bag swinging against the metal carabiner I had used to hang it. Something was messing with my food. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. It was dark, but the moon was bright enough to make out shapes. I saw the bag swinging slightly from the branch, but I didn't see what was causing it. For a few minutes, I watched, knife in hand, every muscle in my body tight. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Something was standing just beyond the fire pit. A tall, human-shaped figure. My blood ran cold. It just stood there, not moving, watching. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was someone. After what felt like forever, the figure turned and melted back into the trees, silent as a shadow. I stayed in the tent until morning. I didn't sleep a second. When dawn broke, I packed up camp in record time. I didn't eat. I didn't even check the bear bag. I just tore everything down, crammed it into my pack, and started hiking out. Every step of the hike back to the car, I felt watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure following me through the trees. I made it to the trailhead without seeing anyone. The two other cars were still there, but no sign of people. I threw my pack into the back seat, slammed the door, and locked it. Only when I was speeding down the cracked forest road did I finally let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding since the night before. It's easy to tell yourself you're being paranoid when you're out in the woods. Nature is full of noises. Shadows play tricks. But that instinct, the tightness in your gut, the hair standing up on your neck, that's not nothing. That's something buried deep in us, older than reason, older than civilization. It's the part of us that survived when nothing was safe. I don't know who that was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I know they weren't lost. They weren't hiking. They weren't hunting. They had no pack, no gear. They were just there, watching. I haven't camped alone since. Maybe someday I will again. Maybe not. But I know one thing for sure now. When you feel that cold, creeping fear telling you something is wrong, you listen. You don't explain it away. You don't rationalize it. You trust it. Because out there, in the middle of nowhere, when it's just you and the trees and the dark, that instinct might be the only thing keeping you alive. I always liked camping alone. Most people I knew never really understood that. They'd always ask why I wanted to be out in the woods by myself, away from everyone, no reception, no help nearby, just me and whatever was out there. For me, it was peace. That quiet you get deep in the woods, the kind you can't find anywhere else. It was like medicine. I worked a job that kept me staring at screens for 10 hours a day, and by Friday, my brain always felt like it was about to melt. So every few months, I'd take a long weekend, load up the back of my truck with my gear, and drive out to some remote area to spend a few nights with no one else around. This trip was supposed to be just like that. I found a spot online that a few guys in a camping forum had talked about. It wasn't an official campsite, just a flat clearing near a narrow river, tucked deep in the woods of northern Arkansas. They said it was quiet, hard to find, but worth the effort. That was all I needed to hear. I drove out early on a Thursday morning, stopped for gas and supplies on the way, then followed a series of dirt roads and half-erased trails until I found the spot. Took me most of the day. By the time I got there, the sun was already starting to drop. The place was exactly what I'd hoped for. Quiet, secluded, no signs of anyone having been there in a long time. I parked the truck a good distance back along the trail to avoid digging it into the soft ground by the river and carried my gear in by foot. I brought my standard setup, small dome tent, sleeping bag, small folding chair, cooler full of ice and food, propane stove, flashlight, extra batteries, water filter, and a lightweight hatchet. I got everything set up just before the light disappeared. I ate a quick meal, beans and rice, heated over the little stove, and sat back to watch the sky shift into darkness. Stars came out sharp and clear. You can always tell how far you are from civilization by how many stars you can see. Out here, there were thousands. That first night was nothing special. I sat in my chair by the fire until the chill started to creep into my jacket, then crawled into my sleeping bag and drifted off with the sounds of the river trickling a few yards away. The next morning, I felt great, rested, and clear-headed. I hiked for a few hours, followed the river upstream a ways, found a rocky bend that looked like it might be good for fishing if I thought to bring a rod. The woods were thick, the trees tall and old. The kind of place where you can almost believe the world is still untouched. But that night was different. It wasn't anything big, not at first. I went to bed around 10, same as the night before. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not because of a sound exactly. It was more the absence of sound that got me. The river, the insects, the rustle of wind through the trees. It was all gone. I sat up in my bag and listened, trying to figure out what felt off. My fire had burned out hours ago, and the tent was dark except for the faint blue light from the moon seeping through the fabric. Then I heard something, a soft crunch outside, like leaves underfoot. Not heavy, just 1 or 2 steps. Then nothing. I stayed still, holding my breath. A long pause, then another step, and another. Whatever it wasn't charging or stomping around. It was slow, deliberate, like it was trying not to be noticed. I reached for the flashlight beside my bag and clicked it on. The tent lit up in a cone of white. I unzipped the flap just enough to peek out. I didn't see anything. No movement. I stayed like that for a while, flashlight beam bouncing over the trees. After a few minutes, I crawled out of the tent. It was cold, maybe in the low 40s. My boots were inside, so I slipped them on and took a few cautious steps around my campsite. Nothing looked out of place. I walked over to where the fire had been, just gray ash and half-burned wood. I turned in slow circles, shining the light out toward the trees. Still nothing. I figured it might have been a deer or some other animal just passing through. That made the most sense. I went back to the tent, zipped it shut, and lay down. But sleep didn't come easy after that. I kept my flashlight in my hand, just in case. The next morning, I walked the area, looked for tracks, disturbed brush, anything that might show me what had been near the camp. I didn't see much. The ground was soft near the river, and I thought I saw a partial print, like the edge of a boot heel, but I couldn't be sure. Could have been mine from the day before. Still, it stuck with me. That feeling in the middle of the night, like I wasn't alone. I pushed it out of my head, went about my day. I collected some wood, cleaned up around the site, made a better fire pit. That night, I sat up longer than usual. I kept the fire going strong. I didn't want to be caught in the dark again. Around midnight, I heard the noise again. Crunching leaves, slow movement near the tree line. This time, I was ready. I had my flashlight and my hatchet on my lap. I stayed still and waited. After a minute or two, the noise stopped. Nothing came closer. I scanned the woods with the light, but it didn't catch anything. I stayed up another hour before finally calling it a night. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were scuff marks in the dirt near my tent. They weren't from an animal. They looked like they'd been made by boots. The toe of one of the prints had dragged, like someone had turned suddenly or lost their balance. I followed the marks a few feet, but they disappeared into the harder ground near the trees. That was when I decided I wasn't going to stay the full weekend. I packed up everything except my tent and sleeping bag and hauled it back to the truck. I figured I'd sleep one more night, just so I didn't have to drive the narrow roads in the dark, but I'd leave first thing in the morning. It wasn't that I was scared exactly, I just had a bad feeling, like something wasn't right. Maybe someone had followed me in. Maybe a hunter or squatter had seen my camp and decided to mess with me. I didn't know, but I wasn't going to push my luck. That final night was the worst. I didn't even bother making a fire. I just stayed in the tent, zipped up tight. I had my flashlight, my knife, and the hatchet close. I didn't sleep much. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the noise again. This time it was closer, right outside the tent. I held my breath and listened. I could hear breathing, not loud but steady, controlled. Then I saw the shadow. A figure passed between the tent and the moonlight, casting a shape against the fabric. Paused. I froze. The shape leaned closer. I heard the soft scrape of fingers against the nylon. I stayed perfectly still, trying to keep my breathing shallow. My heart was thumping so loud I was sure whoever it was could hear it. Then the shadow moved away, slowly. I waited another hour before I dared to unzip the tent. I stepped out, flashlight on, scanning in every direction. There were more boot prints now, clear ones. Someone had walked a full circle around my tent. I followed them a little way into the woods, but they disappeared into the underbrush. That was it. I didn't wait for sunrise. I packed my tent in record time, barely bothering to fold it. I stuffed everything into my pack and jogged back to the truck. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. The sun was just starting to come up as I got the engine running. The drive out felt like it took forever. Every bump in the trail made me flinch. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see someone following me. But no one was there. When I finally hit pavement again, I felt the tension in my chest ease a little. But even after I got home, showered, locked my doors, and sat on my couch with a hot cup of coffee, I couldn't shake it. Someone had been out there, watching, waiting. Maybe they thought I was gone when I hauled out most of my gear. Maybe they were planning to come back later and found me still there. I didn't call the cops. What was I going to tell them? That someone walked around my tent? That I heard breathing? There was no proof. No name, no face. It's been months since that trip. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still think about it, though. The way the shadow moved, the soft touch of fingers against the tent wall, the slow, deliberate steps outside in the dark. Whoever it was, they were careful, quiet, patient. And I know one thing for sure. They weren't just passing through. They were out there for me, and I left just in time. I was never one for crowds, so when I planned my camping trip last fall, I made a point to avoid the more popular sites. I was looking for something off-grid, far enough out where I wouldn't hear another person for days. It had been a rough year. Too many hours behind a desk, too many emails, too many meetings that led nowhere. I needed to be alone, deep in the woods, with nothing but the quiet and the trees. I found a place in Washington State, near the eastern edge of the Olympic National Forest. It was just inside the tree line, beyond a rough fire road that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The only mention I found of it was in a decade-old forum post by someone who had marked it as remote and quiet, but weird vibes. I didn't care about the vibe. I cared about being left alone. That was my only goal. I packed light but thorough. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water purification tablets, emergency radio, first aid kit, bear spray, and a Ruger 10-20 I used mostly for plinking cans on weekends. I wasn't expecting trouble, but I grew up around woodsmen who taught me that being unprepared was about as stupid as walking blindfolded across a highway. I had the basics for 5 days, enough to clear my head before the grind started back up again. I parked my truck as far as I could get it up the narrow road. A fallen tree blocked further access, but that was fine. I loaded up my pack, locked the cab, and hoofed it the remaining mile or so through the thick underbrush. There was no marked trail. I used my GPS and compass to follow a path I'd mapped out ahead of time based on old forestry maps. It wasn't exactly easy terrain. Lots of fallen branches, uneven ground, and low visibility in parts, but it was manageable. When I got to the clearing I'd picked, I set up camp in a shallow rise surrounded by tall trees. It wasn't a perfect spot, no view to speak of, but it was protected from the wind and out of sight from anything passing by. It was late afternoon by the time everything was in place. I made a small fire, boiled some water for dinner, and sat back with my food. It was quiet, dead quiet. Not even birds, just wind in the branches and the occasional creak of wood. That didn't feel weird to me. Forests go quiet sometimes. I chalked it up to the time of year. The first night passed without issue. I slept pretty well. Some animal, probably a raccoon, rummaged around near my tent around 2 or 3 in the morning, but it didn't come too close. I scared it off by unzipping the flap a bit and slapping my hand against the nylon. After that, silence again. Day 2 was spent exploring. I wandered a bit farther out, taking bearings and noting landmarks in case my GPS died. I found an old logging trail, long overgrown, and followed it for a while. That was when I saw the first odd thing. There were sticks hanging from tree branches. Not bundled in a pattern, not carved, not anything symbolic, just sticks, maybe 12 or 15 feet off the ground, wedged into the forks of branches, sometimes with tufts of moss or dry grass stuck to them. They looked like they'd been thrown hard, with enough force to jam into the splits. Some had probably been there for years. Others looked fresher. It wasn't art and it wasn't random either. I don't know how to explain it, but it looked intentional. I kept walking, telling myself it was just debris from storms or wind, maybe some animal behavior I hadn't read about. But deep down, it bothered me. Not enough to leave, not yet. But I kept checking behind me more than I normally would. That night, I made a bigger fire. I didn't like how dark it got out there. Normally, I love the deep woods at night, the stillness, the stars. But something about the silence out here wasn't the good kind. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like everything around me was holding its breath. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement again. This time it wasn't a raccoon. The steps were slow, steady, and heavy, two-legged. I stayed still in my sleeping bag, listening. They circled my tent once. Not rushed, not sneaky, just one full, deliberate loop. Then nothing. I waited for what felt like an hour before I unzipped the tent and shined my flashlight. Nothing. No tracks. No sound. Just cold air and a fire that had burned down to embers. I didn't sleep much after that. On day 3, I didn't wander as far. I stayed within a few hundred yards of my site. That's when I started noticing more signs. Small stacks of sticks, 3 or 4 pieces, balanced in weird ways on rocks or logs. Again, nothing ornate or symbolic, just odd, not natural. If you've spent time in the woods, you know what belongs and what doesn't. These didn't. And then I saw a fresh one. A bundle of 5 thin sticks, maybe a foot long, tied at one end with what looked like sinew or a strip of bark. It hadn't been there the day before. I was sure of that. It was sitting dead center on the flat stone I'd used as a seat the night before, just lying there, pointed at my tent. I didn't touch it. I packed up my gear and made sure my rifle was loaded. I wasn't afraid of fairy tales or legends, but I was starting to wonder if there were people out here, locals maybe, who didn't want company. The wind picked up that afternoon, not hard, but steady, and it brought with it a smell, wet dirt, old meat, and something else like rotting moss. It didn't linger, but it drifted through camp every so often. I couldn't find the source. No dead animal. Nothing visibly decaying nearby. That night, I barely slept. Something moved through the brush off and on, and at one point I heard a sharp crack, like a tree limb being snapped. My fire had burned out again. I didn't get up to relight it. In the early morning hours, right before dawn, I heard a low whistle, just once, long and thin, came from uphill where I hadn't explored yet. It wasn't a bird. It sounded like breath, pushed through teeth. I lay frozen, listening. Then came the crunch of twigs, close, closer than I wanted to believe. I gripped my rifle but didn't move. I didn't want to give away that I was awake. Eventually, the sounds stopped. When the sun rose, I got up and packed everything. I didn't eat. I didn't boil water. I just packed and moved. I had planned for 5 days. I left on day 4. The hike back was quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No squirrels. Even the wind seemed to have died. I kept hearing echoes. Footsteps maybe, maybe not. But I didn't stop. I made it to the truck by early afternoon and threw my gear in without care. I drove with white knuckles all the way back to the main road. At the first gas station, I parked and sat for a while. I didn't realize I was shaking until I reached for a bottle of water and knocked it over. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What could I say? I didn't see anything. I wasn't attacked. But I knew something was out there. Something that didn't want me there. When I got home, I did some reading. I found a handful of posts on obscure forums, mentions in older wilderness books, and even a couple of offhand references in ranger reports. The name I kept seeing, usually half-joking or in quotes, was Stick Indians. Nobody ever gave a clear description. No photos, no proof, just stories about areas where things felt wrong, where campers left early, where hikers went missing. The advice was always the same: Don't look for them. Don't try to understand. Don't go back. I haven't been back to that part of Washington since. I still camp, but I stick to the places with other people around. Marked trails, park boundaries, noise. I've never told anyone the full story until now. And even now, I know how it sounds. But I'll tell you this. If you ever find sticks wedged high into trees, or bundles pointing toward your camp, or hear whistling when there should be none, pack your gear and go. Don't wait. Don't look back. Some places just aren't meant for people to stay in. And some things, whoever or whatever they are, want it that way. I've camped alone more times than I can count. I'm not the kind of person who needs company when I'm out in the woods. I like the quiet. I like the feeling of being away from everything and everyone. You don't hear people yelling or cars honking. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees or the pop of the fire as it eats through the wood. That's the kind of peace I've always chased, and most of the time I get it. But this one trip, this one night, it still won't leave my head. I've gone over everything again and again, trying to figure out how I missed the signs. It should have been an ordinary weekend. 2 nights, solo camp, just me and the woods. No phone service, no distractions. I picked a spot near a lake about 3 miles off a trail in northern Wisconsin. I found the location online, a forum post from a guy who marked it on a topo map and said it had a good clearing, soft ground, and a small beach. I double-checked satellite images and even drove up a day early to scout the trailhead before actually heading in. The weather was good. Clear skies, warm for mid-September. No storms on the radar. I parked early Saturday morning at a small gravel pull-off that barely fit my truck. Threw my pack on, locked up, and headed in. The trail was mostly flat and didn't see much use. Lots of leaves already covering the dirt. A few fallen logs here and there, but nothing I couldn't step over. Felt right. Quiet, steady, and out of the way. By the time I made it to the spot, it was about 11 in the morning. The clearing was just like the guy said, open enough for sun but surrounded by tall trees for cover. The lake sat just 30 feet beyond the treeline. Clear water, a narrow sandy shore, and nothing but woods on the other side. I dropped my pack, drank some water, and took it all in. It was one of those rare moments that feels perfect without needing anything else. Just quiet, wind, and that distant sound of water lapping against the shore. I set up my tent at the far edge of the clearing, closest to the tree line. That way, it would get early morning sun and stay cooler in the afternoon. I laid out my tarp, put the tent on top, staked everything in, and set up my sleep pad and bag. After that, I got a small fire going and boiled some lake water to filter and store in my bottle. Routine stuff. I didn't rush. I had all the time in the world. Around 4 in the afternoon, I made my first meal. Just a quick pouch of beef stew that I heated over the fire. Nothing fancy. I sat on a small folding stool, stared at the fire, and ate. Afterward, I walked the edge of the lake, looked for animal tracks, and stretched my legs. I didn't see any signs of other campers. No trash, no boot prints, no cut branches. Just squirrels, birds, and the occasional frog near the water. Right before sunset, I laid out my food bag and tied it up in a tree well away from camp. I always do this. I know what bears and raccoons can do to a site if you leave food out. I walked about 100 feet east, found a good limb about 12 feet off the ground, tied the paracord over it, and hoisted the bag up. It hung about 6 feet below the limb and 8 feet away from the trunk. Tight and proper. Once it got dark, I sat by the fire and listened. That's always my favorite part. The dark settling in, stars coming out, and just the firelight flickering on the trees. I had one more snack before bed, a granola bar I kept in my jacket pocket from the hike in. I ate that slowly, tossed the wrapper into my trash bag, sealed it, and put it in the tent vestibule. Then I crawled into the tent around 9 and laid down. I didn't fall asleep right away. My mind was calm, but I was still alert, like I always am the first night in new woods. I remember hearing something around 2 in the morning. It wasn't a loud noise, just a soft, repetitive rustling, like something walking through dry leaves. Not fast, not heavy. Figured it was a deer, maybe a possum or raccoon. I unzipped the tent flap just a little and peeked through the mesh. It was too dark to see anything, and I didn't want to use my headlamp unless I had to. The fire had long since burned out, so I couldn't rely on that for light. I waited and listened. The sound faded after a minute or two. No grunts, no snorts. I let it go and laid back down. I woke up at 6 with sunlight filtering through the tent. Cool air, but not cold. I stepped out, stretched, and took a walk down to the water to wash my face. Then I checked the tree where I'd hung my food. The bag was gone. At first I thought I'd walked to the wrong tree, but it was the right one. The paracord was still hanging, but it had been cut. Not frayed, not broken, cut clean like someone used a blade. I stood there, staring at it for a long time, trying to come up with an answer that didn't involve another person. But there wasn't one. The paracord was a thick type, strong enough to hold a full food bag even if it rained. It wouldn't have snapped on its own, and no animal chews through rope that clean. I started looking around the base of the tree. No bag. I widened the search and combed the area in circles. After 10 minutes, I found the bag 20 feet away near a tree stump. It had been ripped open, not like a bear tear, but with something sharp. Inside, all the food was gone. Even the wrappers were missing. No claw marks, no bite marks, just gone. That's when I got the first real feeling that something was wrong. I walked back to camp and looked around. My gear was untouched. My tent was fine. Trash bags still sealed in the vestibule. I sat by the fire ring and tried to think. If someone had come through in the night and cut the bag down, why wouldn't they take anything else? Why not my stove, my water filter, my pack? And who hikes 3 miles off trail just to cut down a stranger's food bag? I tried to convince myself it was a fluke. Maybe some weirdo who didn't want confrontation. Maybe a prank, though it didn't feel like one. Either way, I had to think practically. I still had a granola bar in my jacket pocket, one backup meal in my emergency kit, and the trip was only one more night. I could stretch it. I stayed close to camp most of the day. No hiking, no wandering. Just kept the fire going and kept an eye on the woods. Nothing else happened. No signs of movement. No weird noises. I boiled water again, filled my bottle, and rationed what little food I had left. That night, I didn't eat by the fire. I ate in the tent. Silent, fast, no lights. I left the trash sealed in my pack. I didn't hang it this time. I kept it inside with me. I figured if someone really wanted to screw with me, it wouldn't matter if the food was 10 feet in the air or right next to me. I lay down early, but I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing the wind and second-guessing every rustle. Around midnight, I started to drift off. Just as I was about to fall into real sleep, I heard something again. A faint sound like plastic crinkling. My trash bag. I held my breath and stayed still. My ears were wide open. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, like fingers sliding into a plastic wrapper. Not claws, not paws, fingers. My heart started pounding. I stayed frozen, listening. I could hear the slow tear of the plastic seal being opened. That bag was deep in my pack, zipped up. There was no way anything was getting into it without unzipping it first. I moved slowly, reached for my headlamp, and flicked it on in a flash. The tent was empty. My pack was sitting upright. The zipper was open. The trash bag was out. It had been opened cleanly down the side. The granola bar wrapper I'd left in it was gone. Not dropped, not licked, just gone. I didn't move for over 10 minutes. I scanned the tent, scanned the walls, checked the floor. Nothing. That was the last straw. I waited for first light, packed everything, and hiked out before the sun had fully risen. I didn't eat, didn't boil water, didn't even take the trail back. I cut through the woods, moving fast, bushwhacking the 3 miles back toward the road with a compass and GPS. I didn't care about staying on the trail. I got to my truck by 10, threw everything in the bed, locked the doors, and didn't stop driving until I was back in town. I didn't tell anyone right away. Felt too strange. What was I supposed to say? That someone followed me into the woods, watched me all day, and only stole my trash and food? A few weeks later, I started checking camping forums again. I searched for the same spot, the same lake. I I found one thread short, just a few posts, but one of them mentioned weird food theft in the area. Said someone's bag had vanished overnight. The guy chalked it up to raccoons. But I know what I saw. I've been back out since then, but never to that area. And never without extra locks, food in sealed bins, and a camera trap or two. It wasn't an animal. It was someone who wanted only one thing, my food. Not my gear, not my money, just my food. But they took it the same way I'd take it. Clean, careful, human. And that's the part that sticks with me. Somewhere out there, deep in the woods, is someone who lives off scraps and trash. Someone who knows how to move without sound. Someone who watches camps